The third week of this series called The Search for Happiness. The Search for Happiness. And a few, boy, I think it might have been this last week, but we were at some of my kids were over, and we have a playground that the grandkids like to go to that's not far from our house. And so we all walked over to the playground, and the kids are all playing around, and some of us adults are kind of standing there talking. Well, one of my grandkids, my granddaughter, comes up to me and asks me if I want to play with her. Well, as a grandparent, when your grandkid asks you to play with them, you have to say yes, right? And so I always try and say yes, because I know it's not going to be very far along before asking Grandpa to play with them is not going to happen. They're going to not even pay attention to Grandpa anymore. So I'm playing this little game with my granddaughter, and at this playground, they have this little window where kids can pretend to be giving fast food restaurant or something like that, giving you food. Well, she was pretending that she was at a restaurant giving me food through this little window, and she had her little stack of leaves that she was using for lettuce or salad, and then she had these wood chips on there, on this little platform that you're supposed to pay with the wood chips. And so I didn't have any wood chips, so I couldn't get them. I had to go find some wood chips so then I could buy the salad. So she's she's there, and we're kind of having this transaction of me getting a salad with some wood chips that I went and found. And all of a sudden, her little brother comes over and just pushes all the wood chips and the little leaves off the little table and runs away. And then my granddaughter just starts getting teary-eyed, and she goes off and runs into the corner and is just all sad. And I'm trying to console her and say, well, come on, come back. We'll take care of this. And it reminded me of another story I heard recently. And there was a little boy that climbed up in his daddy's lap one morning, and he said, "Daddy, my heart is so happy." And then got down and went and played with his little brother. And he came back later, and he was all sad and kind of teary-eyed, got up on his daddy's lap, and his daddy said, well, what happened to your happy heart? And he said, "Brian made it all leak out." Right? And that happened. Little kids, they aren't as good at hiding their emotions that we get to be as adults, and their emotions come out really easy. And the truth is, this happens to us all, right? It happens to us a lot, where the happy leaks out of our hearts, and we end up going through struggles and times of depression and times of not being happy. And you've probably heard this. The number one cause of death in America, and actually the world, is heart disease. And people have problems with their physical hearts, and it causes them to sometimes die young. And there's a lot of exercises, that people tell you to do to try and strengthen your heart and to become healthier, stay healthy or become healthy and get a strong heart. And there's also, I think, not only physical exercises we can do to get a strong, healthy physical heart, there's some mental and emotional exercise or spiritual exercises we can do so that we can have an emotionally filled heart, and we don't have our heart leaking out. And the passage that we're going to look at today is in Philippians chapter 2, and it talks about that very thing, how we can improve the emotional health of our heart and not let our happy leak out. And the key thought of this verse, and we're going to be just looking at 7 verses, Philippians chapter 2, verses 12 to 18. And the key thought of this verse is found in the first part of that verse, in verse 12 and 13, the first part of this passage. And it says this: "You must continue to work out your salvation with fear and trembling, for it is God who works in you both to will and to act according to his good purpose." Now, there's two key thoughts there. If you look at the words, I don't know if they're up on the screen. There's the word work out and the words work in. And God it's not two parts to that whole concept. God has a part, and we have a part. God works in us in our salvation, and our part is to work out our salvation. You notice it doesn't say that we work for our salvation. There is some confusion on that sometimes. It says we have to work out our salvation. In Ephesians, it says, by grace we are saved. It's not by our works. It's nothing we can do to earn our salvation. But in this passage here in Philippians, it's saying we got to work out our salvation. And I think it's helpful, if you look in the original languages, the word for this term, work out, is a term that they used to describe either working in a mine or working in a field. So imagine with me that you've been given a gold mine. You have a long-lost relative that owned a gold mine, and they said, "Here, you can have this. I don't want this gold mine anymore." Well, if you have a gold mine and you have this, area of land that has all this gold in them thar hills, if you stand outside your gold mine or stand on top of your gold mine, the gold's not just going to slowly come out of the ground into your hands, right? You have to work at it. Even though the gold is in there, you have to work the gold out. That's this idea that this Bible verse is talking about. God has given us salvation, but we have to work out our salvation. That's our part in it. Same thing with a field. If you have a field, a big field, and you want to plant some crops in it, or you want to grow corn, well, you can't just have your field there and say, "Okay, it's springtime. I'm going to go to Florida because it's a little chilly up here still. And when I come back in the end of summer, I'm sure I'm going to have some corn there." Well, no, there's not going to be any corn in your field because you have to do things like plow the field and plant the corn seed and water it and fertilize it, and then you'll get the benefit of this field and having a crop. You have to work it out. And that's the idea of this passage, these two verses, that we have to work out our salvation. We have to work at it. Just like if we want to get a healthy physical heart, it helps when we do certain exercises so that we can strengthen our heart. And the next 5 verses talk about 5 different ways that we can strengthen our emotional heart. So, it's not talking about our physical heart, but talking about our emotional heart. And there's, just like, we catch bugs or, illnesses or diseases or, viruses. And, we can do things to get rid of those. So what we're going to do is look at these verses, these next 5 verses, and they each kind of address a specific virus that we might have in our emotional heart and kind of an exercise that we can do to overcome that virus. So here we go. This is verse 13. This is the Apostle Paul writing to the people in Philippi, and it's interesting. He's actually writing it from prison. He doesn't know what his future holds, but he's in prison, and so he's writing these people these words of encouragement of how they can stay happy through wherever they're going through. And so Paul says this, "For God is always working in you, giving you both the desire to obey him and the power to do what pleases him." So the potential mental bug that we struggle with is we have a fear of failure. And Paul's saying in here that the truth is God is always with us. It says God is always working in us. God is always working in you. He's always working in me to give us power to do what pleases him. Jesus said it this way. He says, "I will not leave you as orphans." He said this in John 14. "I will be with you." Now, he's not with us physically, but he's with us in our spirit. Romans, Paul says this, "If God is for you, who can be against you?" So God is always with us. He's with us, and he's for us, and he wants to help guide us through this life. And it's so easy, and I find this with myself, and I'm sure you do, it's so easy for us to get caught up in the routine things of life, and we miss the little ways that God works for us. We miss the little things that he do, and sometimes those little things become way bigger than we could ever imagine. I recently heard of this story of a woman who's she's a lady, and she's an author, a Christian author, and a Christian speaker, and she goes around to different conferences, and she speaks for people and encourages them with the good news of God and Jesus and explaining the Bible to them. So she was at this women's conference, and there was like 300 women there, and it was before the conference had started, and she was just kind of going around mingling with people, and she met this lady who was in her mid-40s, and she had a little baby. So she struck up this conversation with this lady, and she says, oh, well, is this, didn't know if it was a granddaughter or whatever. Well, it turns out, it was a son, and he was only 8 months old, but he had Down syndrome. And so this speaker and author was, just kind of wondering, like, how that was going for her. She had, in their conversation, she found out this lady had 2 older kids who were out of the house and gone, and then they had this unexpected third child who had Down syndrome. And as they got talking, the speaker said, well, is there any way I can pray for you? And the mother just kind of broke down a little bit and just said, yeah, just, it's just a really, really tough season dealing with my baby. I haven't slept for 8 months, through the night for 8 months. Then there's other complications with the disability that the baby had. And then, the conference was about to start, and so they went their different ways. And it was a 2-day conference. They were staying at this hotel, and the conference had ended. And so everyone was kind of leaving, and the speaker was sitting around talking with this group of ladies, and the lady with the baby was kind of leaving and stopped and just asked the speaker if she would sign her book for her. That she purchased the speaker's book and wanted a signature. You know how people do that. And so this woman speaker was signing the book and kind of hearing people talking around her, and accidentally wrote a word in there that someone had said. If you ever done something like that, like you're trying to write someone and someone in the room's talking and you write down the wrong thing. You're like, oh, that's not what I meant to do. And so she wrote this word, and she's like, oh, I don't want to just cross it out. That looks stupid. But how can I fit this word into what I'm saying to her? And then it popped in her mind, well, she could tie a verse in that she knows has that word in there. So she writes, she kind of covers her mistake and writes a verse and says, hope this verse will encourage her. And then she gave the mother of the young baby, or the baby, the book, and she left. Well, about 10 minutes later, this mother comes back to the speaker and says, hey, I just got to tell you something. And she was kind of teary-eyed, and she said, I came to this conference. I didn't even want to come to this conference. She said, my husband kind of encouraged me to come here and said, it'd probably be encouraging with the, everything going on in our life. And she said, I just really didn't want to come. And so on my way here, I was just praying that God would really kind of reveal himself to me, encourage me, kind of refresh me with some kind of reminder of his concern for my life. And she said, I went through the whole conference, and I just really didn't feel like God was speaking to me at all. And she said, as I was going up the elevator to get my stuff out of the room, I opened up your book, and I was reading what you wrote to me. And she said, it just hit me. And she started crying, and she said, the verse that you put in this book was a life verse that I had chosen 20 years ago when I came to know Christ as my personal Savior. And she said, it just hit me that God reminded me through you writing this verse that he is for me. He's not going to leave me. He's not going to forsake me. He's going to help me through this season of life. And she said, I just needed to stop and tell you that God used what you wrote in this book to really encourage me. And there's a woman speaker. She's kind of got a sense of humor. She says, Molly, that's her name, this is a way bigger miracle than you could ever imagine. Because, it was all a mistake. But God uses these little things that happen in our lives to encourage us. And we just need to look at them and remember that God is with us and God is for us, even in little things that we could never imagine. So that's the first kind of bug that we go through is we have this fear of failure. The second thing is found in the next couple verses. Paul continues and he says, do everything without complaining or arguing so that no one can speak a word of blame against you. And the mental bug that we go through is we're not grateful for the things we have. And the exercise that we can do to overcome this mental bug of ungratefulness is we need to remove complaining from the routine of our lives. Remove complaining from the routine of our lives. You know, our culture just conditions us daily to complain. You know, when's the last time you were ever watching the news and then all of a sudden you had, you know, ding, 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 news break, this just in. We got to tell you, you won't believe it. We have discovered just now that 250,000 marriages in the Milwaukee metro area have not ended in divorce. Right? No one ever gives news like that. News has to be depressing. I mean, it has to be something negative. It has something that's going to be, you know, more around the complaining idea. And we're just conditioned to complain about things. And it's happened ever since Adam and Eve. Ever since Adam and Eve, mankind has been accusing and excusing. We accuse others of all kinds of their mistakes, and we always want to excuse ourselves from our own mistakes. You know, we say things like, I'll just be happy if I could get married. Or I'd just be happy if I would have a different spouse. Or I'd just be happy if I were single again. Or I'll just be happy when I can have kids. Or I'll just be happy when my kids are out of the house. You know, it doesn't matter like what season of life we're in. We tend to be, it's just so easy for us to complain about what's going on in our season of life. And some people are just chronic complainers. So I heard a story about these two guys who kind of met it, and they were friends that met on the street, and the one guy was just kind of really distraught and is on the verge of tears. And his friend said, well, what's wrong, my friend? Why are you so down? You know, what has the world done to you? And he says, oh, let me tell you, 3 weeks ago, my uncle died and left me $40,000. And the guy's like, well, that's a lot of money. Why are you so upset about that? And he says, well, you see, 2 weeks ago, my cousin died, and he left me $85,000. And this man's like kind of confused. Wait, so you just got $40,000 and $85,000? Like, I'm not getting it. Why are you so upset? He says, well, you don't understand. Last week, my great aunt died. She passed away, and she left me almost $250,000. By this time, the guy is just like, I am not getting this. How come you're so upset? He says, well, this week, I've got nothing. And that's how some people are, you know. You just complain. You find something to complain about no matter what we're going through. And this is the instruction that Paul gives is, hey, we need to be grateful. And it's not only Paul that gives this instructions. I mean, multiple times in the Bible, it gives us instructions that we need to have an attitude of gratitude, be grateful for the things that are happening. Jesus said it this way, I tell you this, you will give an account on Judgment Day for every careless word that you've spoken. And Paul says in 1 Thessalonians, he says, in everything give thanks, for this is God's will for you. And I know there's a difference between complaining where you have no solution for a problem and if you're kind of having critical thinking, coming up with a solution. And it's not like we shouldn't ever kind of be critically thinking through, how do I solve this problem in my life? But to just sit and complain, someone said it this way, complaining without thinking of a solution destroys your relationship with God, it destroys your relationship with others, and it even can destroy your relationship with yourself. So those are the first two kind of mental bugs that that we need to work through. Fear of failure, not being grateful for what we have. The third thing here is found in verse 15 of Philippians chapter 2. It says this, you are to live clean and pure lives as children of God in a corrupt and broken generation. You are to shine like the stars, lighting up in a dark world. So kind of the mental bug that we have to wrestle against is that we might feel ashamed of our past. And the exercise that we can do to overcome this mental bug is we got to retain a clear conscience. Retain a clear conscience. You know, when we look around our culture, most of the divisive topics that are happening in America are people who are trying to deal with their own feelings of guilt or their own feelings of being ashamed. And you know, there's two responses that we have as humans, as mankind. There's two responses that we can have to our guilt and our shame. One is that we admit we did something and we ask forgiveness. And that's kind of the harder path. The easy path that a lot of people want is, you know what, I just want to rationalize and justify my actions, and I want to gather people around me who are going to affirm my actions instead of admitting that what I'm doing is wrong and is causing me this guilt and shame. And so as children of God, this instruction is, hey, you need to live a life of integrity. You need to live a life of purity. You need to live a life that is authentic so that people will look at you and say, now there is a star. You know, you don't find people, even, you know, people who aren't Christ followers, complaining about someone who has good integrity, you know, or complaining about someone who's authentic, or complaining about someone who lives a pure life. You know, it's like, you know, a few years ago, I don't know how many years ago, several years ago, one of my first son got married. And it was the first time I had ever seen this. You know how, like, if you go into a jewelry store, that, you know, they put a lot of the rings and jewelry on black velvet because it kind of makes it stand out. Well, he got this, you know, when he got his engagement ring to give to his wife, now wife, but then girlfriend, it was one of these little special boxes, and you open it up, and it had black velvet in there, but then it had a little light that would shine on the ring to kind of give it that extra little sparkle and accentuate it. And that's what Jesus wants us to be. That's what God wants us to be. He wants us to be little lights that shine in this world around us, in this dark world around us. And we can do that by making sure we have a clear conscience. How do we get a clear conscience? It's simple. 1 John 1:9, if we confess our sins, he is faithful and just to cleanse us from all unrighteousness. And it needs to be a daily thing where we just analyze our lives and say, okay, what have I done today that I need to confess? And instead of trying to justify and rationalize and get people to be on our side, we just need to confess it and ask forgiveness. And we can have a pure and a clean heart. I saw this poem, and there's parts of it that are just really fun way to think about how we can pursue this life of purity. It says this, I have to live with myself, and so I want to be fit for myself to know. I don't want to keep on the closet shelf a lot of secrets about myself and fool myself as I come and go into thinking that nobody else will know the kind of man I really am. I don't want to dress myself up in a sham. I can never hide myself from me. I see what others may never see. I know what others may never know. I never can fool myself, and so whatever happens, I want to be self-respecting and conscience-free. And it's, you know, I'm not a good rhymer, so like when I see that kind of stuff, I'm like, oh, that's really cool. Having a clear conscience is something that's internal, because a lot of the things that bother us and give us guilt are things that other people might not even know. And we need to confess it to God and keep a pure heart from God. But there are other things that we do that we need to confess and ask other people's forgiveness. Don't be like the shoplifter. There was a shoplifter who wrote to a department store and said, I've just become a Christian, and I can't sleep at night because I feel guilty. So here's $100 that I owe you. And he signed his name. Then he added a little P.S. If I still can't sleep, I'll send you the rest. Don't be like that. All right, those are the first three bugs that we kind of struggle with, and some antidotes for those little viruses, mental viruses. Here's the third one. Paul says this, writing to the people in Philippi. Verse 16, hold tightly to the word of life. And you know, the bug here is we get discouraged. I get discouraged by my future outlook. And the exercise that we can do to overcome that mental bug is to review God's promises daily. You know, we have depression, anxiety, worry are just on the rise in America. As a matter of fact, a recent study said 30 to 40% of Americans confess to feeling anxious or feeling depressed or having worry. You know, if you think you might be struggling with depression, here's some symptoms that people say are, you know, experts, professionals say might be a cause of depression. You have sleep problems, you have weight gain or weight loss, lack of energy, loss of concentration, problems with self-confidence or self-image, ongoing thoughts of death or suicide. And you know, there's different ways that people deal with depression, and different ways people overcome depression. Sometimes it's an actual, like, you know, some kind of chemical imbalance that you need to get fixed, you know, it's a medical problem, and you need to go to a doctor and get whatever medicine you need. Sometimes it's an emotional or a relational issue, which really is part of the spiritual side of us. Our spirit is what holds our emotions in. And if we just meditate on negativity, it's just going to feed that worry in our lives. And if we can learn to just meditate on God's promises, it'll change our mind. It can transform us from this attitude of discouragement to an attitude of encouragement. Psalm 119, I like what it says. It says, lead me in the path of your commands, because that is where my happiness is found. And it's that same idea that God will lead us, and when we follow him and follow his truth and follow his path and follow his values and his principles, it will make us happy. There's this a book written by a Christian pastor, and it's called Depression, Anxiety, and Other Things We Don't Want to Talk About. And he describes depression like this. And I don't know if you're feeling like this morning, but maybe if you are, you'll identify with his description. Depression takes so many forms. Here's how it looked for me today. All day I felt like a failure. An unending loop played in my head telling me that I have failed everyone in my life and everyone who loves me. My thoughts primarily focused on my wife and children who deserve a father who's not a failure. They deserve a father who's loving, financially successful, upbeat, and well-liked. But what they have instead is me, a person who is none of these things. I am a failure. This is what my depression tells me, and this is how I feel. Facts and reality mean nothing. I know that none of this is actually true, and yet knowing this does absolutely nothing to make me feel better. The only truth that matters is the one that lives inside my head. My feelings of failure also made it near impossible for me to think clearly today. I struggled mightily to write just a few words. Words that probably suck and will be no use to anyone. On top of all this is this pervasive boredom that has replaced my interest in the topics I know I like. I went for a long jog today and listened to a book that has mesmerized me, but today I had to force myself to keep listening. I know intellectually that I'm interested in what the writer is saying. I can also appreciate the fact that the book is well written. I also know that I want to know what will happen next in the story, and yet today I don't even care I do not care and feel as though I will never care about anything else. This is depression, and this is hard. I just want to say to you today, if you are struggling with depression or anxiety, don't do what so many people are doing and trying to self-medicate through alcohol or self-medicate through drugs or self-medicate through food. Get some help. There's people, there's counselors that you can help you navigate through some of these feelings of depression you might be having. But Paul says, review God's promises. And that's a good starting point. No matter if you need to get professional help or not. Study God's word. Read his word daily. Learn what God's principles and values are, and it will help you. The last thing is this, found in verse 16. Your faith makes you offer your lives as a sacrifice in serving God. If I have to offer my own blood as a sacrifice, I will be happy and full of joy. Remember, he was in prison. He didn't know if he was going to go die right after this prison term. But so he said, I may be not seeing you again because I may be dead. But I'm going to be happy and full, Paul says. And he says, you should be happy and full with me. No matter what your circumstances. You could be sitting in jail on your way to the death penalty. And he was saying he's happy. So if you're not in that situation, you should be happy too. And that's a good message for us. But the mental bug that we struggle with is we have just too much self-focus. That's the whole idea here is he says, live your lives as a sacrifice serving God. Live your life as a sacrifice serving God. Well, how do we serve God? The only way we can serve God on this earth is by serving others. As a matter of fact, we can't see God. He's invisible, right? Jesus said it this way, the things you do to the least of my brothers and sisters, you're doing it for me. So when you're polite to someone, when you're nice to someone, when you're friendly to someone, when you're helpful to someone, it's like you're serving God. And God has wired us and created us that happiness doesn't come from our status, or happiness doesn't come from our success, or happiness doesn't come from our salary. Just look at all of the rich people, celebrities that you hear that end up overdosing because they're not happy. They're trying to solve their own emotional issues through drugs, and they end up overdosing. It's not just celebrity. That's a huge problem going on all around us. People are trying to self-medicate through drugs and get over their whatever emotions they're going through, and people are dying of drug overdoses left and right. I heard a story this week. It was crazy. Now they're all over our country. There's different people who are putting out how like if you're overdosing and they have that drug called Narcan that you can't give it to yourself, but you could give it to someone you see overdosing and stop them from overdosing. So all these cities around our country are trying to go into drug-infested areas and offer free these vending machines with free Narcan. And they think, that's going to solve the problem. And it's not solving the problem. As a matter of fact, in a lot of the areas that are getting the free Narcan, the people aren't using it. And the drug problem's just getting worse and worse all around our country. So it's really sad. And the point is this. It's not our salary. It's not our status. That's going to give us happiness, but it's serving others, and that's how God wired us. When we stop focusing ourselves and start focusing on others, it changes something in us, and it changes our focus, and it's like we're serving God. Jesus said this: "I didn't come to be served, but to serve and give my life as a ransom for others." That was the main thing Jesus modeled for us, is serving others. And serving can be spontaneous, or it can be just something that you do on a regular basis. A few weeks ago I was getting off the freeway one day, just over here on Beloit, getting off the freeway onto Beloit Road, and there was a car. There were two cars in front of me, and the one 2 cars up was stalled, and the guy, it's kind of like a little bit of an incline, and this guy had gotten out, the car right in front of me had gotten out and went to start pushing this car out of the way so people could get by, and so he wasn't stuck right in the middle of the off ramp. And so, I could have just sat there, and I'm like, well, you know what? I'm going to go help too. They look like they're struggling. So I got out, and it was just like a spontaneous way that I saw someone in need, so I got out to try and help them. And sometimes serving can look like that, but other times serving looks like it's a regular thing that you're doing, that you're volunteering somewhere. We have a lot of people, a lot of you, all of you are involved in different areas of serving around church. You know that we have people that cut all, we have, I don't know how many acres now, 15, 16 acres of land. We have people that volunteer to mow our land every week. People that volunteer to go out and weed the flower gardens and plant flowers. And an organization like ours, we have, people volunteer to help out in the nursery. People volunteer to help in Awana. People on Wednesdays. People volunteer to help do tech stuff. And, an organization like ours is dependent on volunteers, people just serving others. And we all work together to help grow and build God's kingdom in this little small part of the world, Greenfield, Milwaukee metro area, Wisconsin. And so, if you're not part of some kind of a serving thing regularly, we'd love to have you join us in helping out with some of the serving areas that we need help with. We have, in a few weeks, we're having this family fest. And the kind of goal of Family Fest is multifaceted. We want all of us to be able to get together and encourage one another as we, just kind of celebrate being part of God's family together. But we also want people to invite others to come and be part of God's family and to see what this community of Christ followers is like, and to reach out into, there's people who are searching for some kind of community. And it's a great opportunity for you to share and invite people to become part of our church community. So, giving. So many of you people, of all of you, have given to be able to improve our children's area. And our children's area is pretty much done. If you haven't seen, like, the whole indoor playground and everything, walk down the hall and see the beautiful, fun area that kids love to hang out at on Sundays after church. And, our whole goal in that is just so that we can reach families with young kids with the good news of Jesus and help people grow in their relationship with Jesus. And so, our kids' ministry is growing, and people are coming and bringing their kids to be part of our church family because of the sacrifice a lot of you made to donate to be part of that building improvement with the kids' ministry. The next project that we have coming up is we need to kind of give this room a facelift. Don't look at the carpet because you'll be scared. And so we need to get some new flooring in here and some newer chairs, and so that's going to be kind of our next project that we're going to be working towards to give this room a facelift. But all of it's trying to serve God by serving others and helping others to see that they can have hope through Jesus. And that's what our whole purpose is as a church community here on this earth. So those 5 things, remember that God is with you and for you. Remove complaining from your routine. Retain a clear conscience. Review God's promises daily. Readjust your focus towards God and not others. If we can do those things, it's going to make a big difference in your heart being happy and keeping that happy heart because you're following God's plan for you. Let's go ahead and pray, and then we'll dismiss. Father, this morning I just thank you for everyone who's taken time out of their weekends to come together here to worship, to celebrate, to meditate on who you are and what you've done in our lives. And Lord, I just pray for each of us. All of us probably can do better in one of these areas that we struggle with. And I pray, Lord, that you would just help each of us to consider the area that we need to work on, and then have the courage to do what we need to do to make changes in our life. And give us wisdom to do the right thing. And I